Before the Pharaohs, northern Africa was home to early humans, lost kingdoms, and the foundations of civilization. This is the story until 3100 BCE. Northern Africa's story begins deep in prehistory, when the Sahara was not the vast desert it is today, but a land of shifting climates and habitats. Over hundreds of millennia, the region's environment cycled between wet green savannas and arid desert. These dramatic climate swings created windows of opportunity for early humans. Fossil lake beds and river valleys provided pockets of life amid changing conditions. It was in such landscapes that the first humans emerged in North Africa. In modern Algeria, stone tools and butchered animal bones, unearthed at An-Bushri, date to about 2.4 million years ago, pointing to one of the earliest human presences outside East Africa. These simple Oldowan-style chopping tools and bones suggest that by this time our distant ancestors were already processing animal carcasses on the North African plains. Slightly later, at nearby Ain Hanech, layers of artifacts dated to 1.8 million years old have also been found, reinforcing that early tool-making hominins spread across the Maghreb's savanna woodlands. By around 700,000 years ago, North Africa was home to Homo erectus. At Tighennif in Algeria, paleoanthropologists discovered robust human jawbones of this species, alongside animal fossils and Acheulean hand axes. The Tighennif site reveals a scene of ancient life, a small lake or swamp amid treeless, semi-arid grassland, where early humans hunted large game. Early toolmakers likely scavenged meat from megafauna, or hunted with simple stone flakes and hand axes, gathering edible plants in wetter intervals. Periodically, the Sahara's climate shifted. During warmer, wetter periods, it became a grassland dotted with lakes, allowing animals and human ancestors to spread north. During cooler, drier phases, deserts expanded, confining life to refuges near water or in the Mediterranean borderlands. These fluctuations repeatedly separated and reconnected populations, perhaps driving human innovation and survival skills. By the end of this chapter of prehistory, archaic humans were giving way to a new form, the earliest Homo sapiens. Fossil remains from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco show that by over 300,000 years ago, anatomically modern humans had appeared in North Africa. The stage was set for modern humans to carry forward the legacy of tool-making and adaptation and inherit the world. For those who don't know, our channel tries to share history from all over the world, but have never done ad reads or spoken to advertisers. All we ask is to subscribe if you enjoy these historical journeys, and if possible, consider becoming a member, and we can finish this project together. As the Middle Stone Age unfolded, Homo sapiens, our own species, spread across northern Africa. They shared the landscape with now extinct animals and likely encountered other human lineages as they became dominant in Africa. Over the next 270,000 years, these early Homo sapiens learned to thrive in northern Africa's diverse environments, from the Atlantic coast and Atlas Mountains to the Nile Valley and Sahara basins. One hallmark of this Middle Stone Age is the tool tradition known as the Aterian, named after Bir el Ater in Algeria. Aterian hunters ranged across what is now the Sahara as early as almost 150,000 years ago, and for tens of millennia thereafter left behind distinctive stone points with tangs or stems, likely hafted to spears. Archaeology paints a vivid picture of Aterian life. They set up camps beside lakes and springs in a Green Sahara, hunting abundant game like antelope, buffalo, elephants and rhinoceros, and gathering wild plants. These toolmakers mastered the Levallois flaking technique to produce sharp spearheads and scrapers, and even engaged in mining high-quality stone. In Egypt's Nile Valley, groups at Nazlet Sabaha were quarrying chert for toolmaking as early as 100,000 years ago. Such organized extraction of flint suggests advanced planning and knowledge of mineral resources. Cultural creativity blossomed in this era, indicating not just survival, but symbolic thought. In a cave at Tafaralt in eastern Morocco, whose deeper layers might be related to the Aterian, archaeologists have uncovered perforated snail shells stained with red ochre, used as personal ornaments. These shell beads have been dated to about 82,000 years ago, and recent discoveries in even older layers hint such bead-making might date back to even 110,000 years ago in North Africa. The people of the Aterian culture likely strung and wore these ochre-coloured beads, suggesting a sense of identity, aesthetics, or ritual, not mere tools of survival, but of meaning. By around 125,000 years ago, a warm interglacial phase made the Sahara lush, likely enabling some early modern humans to range into new territories. But later in the Ice Age, especially by 70,000 years ago, hyper-arid conditions struck the Sahara, transforming it into a harsh desert. Aterian communities would have been forced to abandon the drying lands, retreating to more livable sanctuaries, perhaps south into the Sahel and beyond to tropical Africa, or towards the Mediterranean coast. Genetic and archaeological evidence suggests some bands even left Africa during wetter windows, crossing Sinai into the Levant or the Red Sea onto the Arabian Peninsula. Those who remained in North Africa survived by flexibility. When deserts expanded, they clustered around river valleys and coasts. When rains returned, they pushed into the revitalized grasslands. At Afad 23 in Sudan's Dongola region, archaeologists found the remains of a 50,000-year-old encampment, including traces of one of the world's oldest known huts, an open-air shelter built by prehistoric hunters. As the world entered the coldest grip of the Ice Age, northern Africa faced the extreme conditions of the last glacial maximum around 20,000 years ago. The Sahara Desert expanded far beyond its current limits, and rainfall plummeted. It was bleak, but human life persisted. In coastal Maghreb, along the Nile corridor, and in upland oases, our late Stone Age ancestors weathered thousands of harsh years with ingenuity and resilience. It was during this time that a new culture, known as the Iberomaurusian, emerged in the Maghreb. Appearing just before the last glacial maximum, the Iberomaurusian people were prolific toolmakers and hunters. They crafted very fine bladelets and microliths, small sharp stone flakes, perhaps hafting them into barbed harpoons or arrowheads. This culture lasted until the end of the Ice Age, spanning the glacial peak and the transition to warmer times. In coastal caves like Grotte des Pigeons at Tafaralt, they left behind bone tools, shell ornaments and cemeteries. By the end of this period, Tafaralt Cave was used as a burial ground, the largest known late Stone Age cemetery in North Africa. Dozens of individuals were interred there, some covered in red ochre and accompanied by animal horns, indicating ritual burial practices and an emotional connection to the dead. These people foraged a varied diet. Remains of gazelle and wild cattle bones are found alongside seafood in coastal sites, and they likely gathered wild grain and fruits when available. In the Nile Valley as well, late Paleolithic groups like the Kormusan and their successors adapted to changing resources. As the climate oscillated, they developed new tools not only of stone, but also of bone and horn, and intensively fished the Nile's waters. The Kardan culture showed early attempts at harvesting wild cereals with flint sickle blades, foreshadowing agriculture. This experimentation may have been born of necessity, as the end of the Ice Age was a time of scarcity and stress. Evidence of this from the Kardan site of Jebel Sahaba, a prehistoric cemetery near the Nile in Nubia, suggests that competition for resources turned violent. Archaeologists excavating Cemetery 117 found that a majority of the skeletons bore arrow or spear injuries, many showing multiple healed and unhealed wounds. These people did not all die in a single battle. They suffered repeated raids and ambushes, chronic conflict between groups. Scientists conclude this may be the earliest evidence of warfare in human history. The timing might tell the story. In the grip of the Ice Age, as prime fishing spots along the Nile dwindled, groups of hunter-gatherers likely clashed over the remaining fertile patches. The Jebel Sahaba finds illustrate the stark realities of late Ice Age life. On one hand, innovation and adaptation, but on the other, an unforgiving environment brings with it social tensions. Around 14,000 years ago, the global climate began to warm and wetter conditions slowly returned to northern Africa. Human populations, which had contracted into safe sanctuary during the glacial maximum, spread and recolonized the Sahara's grasslands. In the highlands of southern Algeria and Libya, late Paleolithic people left an unexpected legacy of art. On rock faces and cliff walls, they carved and painted the animals and spirits of their world. Some of the earliest engravings, attributed to the so-called Kel-Esuf period, may date to the early Holocene. These abstract engravings and mysterious figures herald the flowering of Saharan rock art. Perhaps even earlier, hunter-gatherers in the central Sahara were depicting wildlife in what researchers call the large wild fauna period of rock art. In shelters of the Tassili Naja or the Akakas Mountains, one can imagine families huddled around a fire as elders chiseled the outlines of giraffes and cattle into stone, capturing a record of a world that was about to change with the coming of a new era. Over thousands of years, the desert of the last glacial maximum had transformed into a Green Sahara. Monsoon rains penetrated deep into the continent, filling basins with lakes and turning dunes into grasslands. This period corresponds to the North African Mesolithic and early Neolithic, an era of fisher hunter-gatherers gradually transitioning to herding and farming. Archaeology reveals a patchwork of cultures adapting to local conditions, from the Maghreb to the proto-agricultural communities along the Nile. In the Maghreb, the Iberomaurusians faded with the ice, and the Capsian culture dominated this era. Capsian people were hunter-gatherers at first, but with a twist. They are famous for their appetite for land snails. Enormous trash heaps at Capsian open-air sites, called Ramadiat, contain ashes, stone tools, animal bones, and countless snail shells, evidence of feasts on roasted snails over generations. By around 6000 BCE, some Capsian groups had begun keeping domesticated animals and making pottery, blending into a Neolithic lifestyle. Meanwhile, further east in Libya's Akakas Mountains and the Egyptian Western Desert, prehistoric communities took advantage of newly verdant landscapes. Seasonal lakes like Nabta Playa became gathering places for semi-nomadic peoples. Archaeologists have found that by around 7500 BCE, people at Nabta Playa were not only herding cattle, but also carving megalithic stone alignments on the lakeshore, an early calendar or astronomical device that predates Stonehenge by nearly 2,000 years. The inhabitants of Nabta Playa erected stone circles and perhaps held rituals there, suggesting a surprisingly complex social structure for what were still essentially pastoral camps. In Upper Nubia, the Khartoum Mesolithic culture thrived on the banks of the Nile and its overflow lakes. These people were expert fishermen and gatherers who made some of the world's earliest pottery, impressively fine wavy-lined ceramics, used perhaps for storing fish oil or water. They lived in small settlements, relying on the rich Nile ecosystem. Farther north, in what would become Egypt, evidence of human presence during this time is scant, likely because the ever-shifting Nile has destroyed or buried many sites. One transformative development brought on by the Humid period was the spread of domestic animals. In the Sahara, archaeologists interpret rock engravings of cattle with supernatural motifs as evidence of a cattle cult, implying that pastoralism had deep cultural significance. By around 6000 BCE, cattle herders ranged across what are now the deserts of southern Egypt and northern Sudan, tending zebu-like cattle. Chemical residues in pottery and rock art scenes suggest that these pastoralists had learned to milk their herds, providing a nutritional buffer in dry seasons. Meanwhile, sheep and goats, originally domesticated in Southwest Asia, reached North Africa as herders migrated or traded across Sinai. With livestock came new mobility. Families could now convert grass into meat and milk, allowing them to inhabit areas that pure hunter-gatherers could not. This new Sahara was dotted with transient camps of cattle herders, whose rituals left a rich artistic record. In the central Sahara's highlands, like at Tassili Naja, the period from 7500 BCE onward is termed the Roundhead period of rock art. Surviving paintings show enigmatic human figures with round, featureless heads engaging in what look like dances or ceremonies, often amid wildlife scenes. These striking images likely depict shamans or spirit figures, hinting at complex ritual life among the forager herders. In later millennia, a newer style focuses on humans with domesticated animals, mirroring the pastoral way of life that had taken hold. By the end of this period, northern Africa was on the cusp of another major change. After about 6000 BCE, the Saharan monsoon began a steady southward retreat. Lakes that had been deep and teeming with fish began to shrink. Grasslands turned back into scrub and sand. The desertification of the Sahara had begun. As the surrounding Sahara grew drier, the center of action in northern Africa increasingly shifted to the Nile Valley and its fringes. This was the dawn of pre-dynastic Egypt. One key development was the emergence of agriculture. After 6000 BCE, early farmers in the Nile Valley began cultivating Southwest Asian crops. The first farmers in Egypt were from the Delta and Fayum, people growing wheat and barley and herding sheep, goats and cattle. Small farming hamlets of the Merimde culture, like Merimde Beni Salama in the Delta, and settlements of the Fayum A culture, used flint sickles and grinding stones to harvest and process grain. In Upper Egypt and Nubia, local adoption of agriculture occurred later. The lifestyle of these Neolithic communities was changing in other ways too. Instead of transient camps, people built more permanent villages of mud huts or wattle and daub houses on high ground above the Nile flood. In Upper Egypt, the first such villages appear around 5000 to 4500 BCE, and soon after, we can identify distinct cultural groups along the Nile. One of the most well-known is the Badarian culture. The Badarians were the first farmers in Upper Egypt. They cultivated wheat and barley, kept cattle, sheep and goats, and were skilled artisans. Badarian people lived in small villages of oval huts, some semi-subterranean. Badarian pottery in particular is celebrated. Their ceramics were thin-walled and finely made, including a characteristic black-topped redware achieved by special firing techniques. The elegance of Badarian pottery and ivory figurines suggests an increasingly complex material culture. Cemeteries reveal that some individuals were buried with richer offerings, such as jewelry of shell and turquoise, polished stone pallets, and even imported items, while others had modest burials. This final prehistoric chapter centers on Upper Egypt and northern Sudan, where the foundations of pharaonic Egypt were laid. Archaeologists call this era in Egypt the Naqada period, after the site of Naqada in Upper Egypt. It is divided into stages, Naqada 1, 2, and 3. The Naqada evolved out of the Badarian, but expanded to become more sophisticated. During Naqada 1, Upper Egyptian society was still largely agrarian and village-based, yet signs of increasing complexity emerged. Communities traded for luxury materials, obtaining obsidian from Ethiopia, with exotic shells and gemstones. They also traded with their neighbors in Nubia and the desert oases. Technologically, this period saw the introduction of new craft techniques, as Naqada potters produced the classic black-topped redware, and also experimented with painted vessels, adorning clay pots with ochre depictions of animals and boats. We also find the first copper objects appearing, hinting at the dawn of metallurgy in Egypt. Socially, certain Naqada burials stand out for their wealth, suggesting nascent elites. By Naqada II, these trends accelerated. The Naqada culture spread throughout Egypt, unifying previously distinct regional cultures into a more homogeneous cultural sphere. Settlements grew larger, especially in Upper Egypt, where proto-urban centers like Hierakonpolis, Naqada, and Abydos rose in prominence. These were not yet cities, but large towns that served as hubs of trade, craftsmanship, and ritual. Hierakonpolis had areas for specialized production, boasting the first large-scale beer brewery in the world, and elite cemeteries with increasingly monumental tombs. One famous tomb at Hierakonpolis, Tomb 100, even featured a mural painting, the earliest known painted tomb in Egypt, showing boats, warriors, and possibly a king-like figure dated to around 3400 BCE. Such elaborate burial art suggests the emergence of religious or political symbolism tied to power. Technologically, Naqada II people achieved new heights. They began producing marl clay pottery, a stronger ceramic for storage, and extensively worked gold, copper, and faience, a ceramic material. Beautifully flaked flint knives with ripple-flaked blades, like the famous Gebel el-Arak knife, date to this era, evidence of mastercraft specialists. By Naqada III, small pictographic signs started appearing on pottery and carved labels representing the first proto-writing in Egypt. These signs would evolve into the earliest hieroglyphs. At Abydos, ivory tags with inscribed symbols were found at Tomb Uj, denoting quantities of goods and likely the name of domains or officials. This was an unmistakable precursor of writing and record-keeping. In this period, we also see the first recognizable kings, which is why Naqada III is often also called the proto-dynastic period, or Dynasty 0. Rulers with names such as Scorpion and Crocodile emerged from the mist of legend. The process of state formation was in full swing, as warfare and competition between proto-kingdoms intensified. Ceremonial maceheads and pallets from Hierakonpolis depict kings performing rituals like irrigation inaugurations, indicating established kingship rituals by the late 4th millennium. In these centuries, Lower Egypt, the Nile Delta, was also home to advanced cultures like the Mahdi and Buto, though the evidence is sparser. They had trade links to the Levant and produced their own styles of pottery. By 3200 BCE, artifacts in the Delta begin to show the Naqada style. Cultural unification was underway, but the final path toward the Egyptian state came through military conquest. Meanwhile, to the south in Nubia, the A-group culture flourished, reaching its height around 3100 BCE. A-group society had wealthy cemeteries, like at Qustul. One incense burner from Qustul famously bears an image of a ruler wearing the white crown, leading to some speculation about Nubian influence on Egyptian royal imagery. Whether or not Nubian chiefs styled themselves as kings themselves, their power soon faded. But Nubia's role in this era was significant. It supplied gold, incense, and exotic products, strengthening the prestige economy of the emerging Egyptian state. By 3100 BCE, the prehistoric era in northern Africa draws to a close with the rise of dynastic Egypt. The Naqada III period's royal tombs at Abydos, with dozens of servants buried to serve in the afterlife and warehouses of offerings, demonstrate that a state apparatus was emerging. In them lie the ancestors of the pyramids. Across the river valleys and desert tracts, symbols of authority spread: sereks, pallets, crowns. These were no longer simple chieftains, they were kings, and one of them was preparing to do something no one had ever done before: to claim all the Nile as one.